Hello, and thank you for launching this presentation entitled Turning the Tables on Shakespeare's Sonnets Part 2. My name is Eric Luskow, and today is August 9th, 2025. I'll be approaching the sonnets from an Oxfordian perspective, i.e. that Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford, was the author of these stunning poems historically attributed to Will Shakespeare, the man from Stratford. If you're not familiar with the Shakespeare authorship question and the Oxfordian theory, please visit the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship website, shakespeareoxfordfellowship.org, for an overview. Also, if you've not watched my video, Turning the Tables on Shakespeare's Sonnets Part 1, I highly recommend watching that first. So we left off in Part 1 considering this first line letter table with a focus on the letters R and O. As an aside, I'll point out here that there are several letters with line count suggestive of Christian numerology. A has 360 or 36 and O for Oxford. C has 30 or 3 with O for Oxford. D has 36 and Y has 34. But in this video, we'll be focusing on the letter T. There are 439 sonnet lines in total beginning with the letter T. That number is suspiciously high compared to the other letters, but more importantly, it's comprised of the quaternary, 4, the ternary, 3, and the number signifying God in Christian numerology, 9. With the letter T, we also have the representation of the cross and the proto-Masonic triple tau. So here's a new table. In this one, I've listed the sonnets by the number of lines beginning with the letter T. It's a bit small, but don't worry. I'll zoom in subsequent slides so you can see what our poet was up to with this extraordinary method of connecting himself to God and revealing his identity to attentive readers. To state it plainly, my argument here is that Oxford used the lines beginning with the letter T as a key to create blocks of sonnets arranged in meaningful numeric patterns. It sounds more complicated than it is, and I'm confident you'll quickly see the sheer genius of what he did with this particular table. So in this slide, we see that out of 154 sonnets, there are only 2, sonnets 13 and 125, that have no lines beginning with T. To the right, I show how these numbers reflect God, Oxford's geometric numbers, indicating his authorship, or both. So adding 13 and 125 with standard edition, we get 138. So then if we take that 138 and add 1 plus 38, we get to 39, 3 for the Trinity or Christ, and 9 for God. Adding the numbers numerically, which I'll refer to here on out as sequentially, because I think it makes it a little more plain. 1 plus 3 plus 1 plus 2 plus 5 results in 12, which added together results in another 3. We also have with 13, 1 plus 3 resulting in 4, the quaternary, and with 125, we can break that up to 12 plus 5 equaling 17, one of Oxford's numbers, and not coincidentally, a similar number to the page number Hamlet begins on in the first folio. There are 35 sonnets which contain only one line beginning with T. Note that 35 sonnets plus the one-line qualifier equals 36. Oxford will do similar pairings between sonnet count and T-letter line count, as you'll see. I won't recite all the data to the right in this or future slides. I'll just note select highlights, and you can pause to look more closely if you'd like. For this slide, I'll point out the last observation, which adds the standard edition total of the numbers of the 35 sonnets, 2,605, and the numerical/sequential total of 301, equaling 2,906, which then added sequentially 2 plus 9 plus 0 plus 6 comes to 17 with a 0 or O for Oxford included for good measure. Remember, gematria is creative. Our author was, to state it mildly, quite inventive with words, and as I'm attempting to demonstrate in these videos, numbers as well. My interpretations may or may not align exactly with Oxford's intentions. He didn't leave us a handbook for geometric deconstruction, but the overwhelming number of examples observable in the sonnets precludes coincidence. The numerology is intentional and, most importantly, provides an additional means of textual analysis. Put another way, the numbers are not incidental or superfluous. They are intrinsic to understanding the sonnets. So there are 29 sonnets, each of which contains 2 lines beginning with the letter T. Adding all 29 sonnets sequentially gives us the number 246, which can be rearranged as 426, Earl of Oxford, or 624, Edward de Vere. See Alexander Waugh's video, The Incomparable Genius of John Dee, for more on 426 and 624, which explains how they are key to deciphering the blatantly cryptic sonnet dedication page. Also note that adding the first 5 sonnets sequentially, one of which happens to be Sonnet 17, gives us a result of 17. That's 3 plus 1 plus 0 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 2 plus 1 plus 7. There are 45 sonnets, each of which contains 3 lines beginning with T. Note that adding the standard and sequential totals equals 4369, which by now you should recognize as numbers reflecting Christian and Masonic symbolism. Adding 4 plus 3 plus 6 plus 9 introduces a new number, 22, which represents the idea that work is honorable in the proto-Masonic/Freemasonic philosophy. I'll let you research that one on your own if you so desire, but there are many, many examples. Also note the first 4 sonnets added sequentially equals 14. The last 2 added sequentially equals 17. The last 4 added sequentially equals 40. And the last 6 added sequentially equals 51, which is 17 times 3. That's a lot of Oxfordian numbers packed into this grouping, but our grammatically inclined poet is just getting warmed up. There are 23 sonnets, each containing 4 lines beginning with the letter T. Note that 2 plus 3 plus 4 equals 9, and that the standard and sequential totals also result in 9, representing God. Also, the first 3 sonnets in this group are 1, 2, and 5. We reviewed the significance of 1, 2, 5 earlier, but this is a particularly noteworthy example. Adding the first 4 sonnet numbers sequentially results in 14, and this is a good opportunity to point out the doubleness of the number 14 and how it signifies Oxford. 14 is the grammatric value of the letter O, which has been noted countless times in prior Oxfordian analyses. But I'm not sure if it's been previously noted that adding the 1 and the 4 equals 5, which is the grammatric value of E. So with this one number, we get the initials EO. If this has been noted previously in the ever-expanding Oxfordian research, obviously I defer credit. Lastly, adding the last 16 sonnet numbers sequentially results in 152, which bookends nicely with the sonnets 1, 2, and 5 we started with in this group. This is the smallest grouping since the sonnets containing no T lines, yet our poet manages to pack it full of numerology. There are 7 sonnets containing 5 lines beginning with the letter T. Oxfordians will immediately recognize the significance of combining these 2 numbers to form 57, which is the total of Oxford's grammatric numbers of 40 and 17. I can't help but again marvel at the late Alexander Waugh's decryption of Oxford's signature, into which Oxford incorporated these 2 numbers. It's also part of his YouTube video, The Incalculable Genius of John Dee. But back to our slide, which contains many examples of Christian numerology as shown in the slide, and then concludes with the sequential addition of the last 3 sonnets equaling 14, EO in grammatric translation, as I related in the previous slide. So here we have the sonnets that each contain 6 lines beginning with the letter T. There are 9 of them, providing us with the very Christian numbers 6 and 9. As an aside, in Christian numerology, any combination of 3, 6, and 9 can be manipulated to result in 369. In this case, 9 minus 6 provides the missing 3. This grouping actually contains sonnet 69, which again argues against randomness. if anyone still believes these numeric machinations are not intentional. The first two sonnets total 57, which, as we just covered in the prior slide, are the total of Oxford's geometric numbers 40 and 17. The last 7 sonnets added sequentially also equals 57. Additionally, this group contains Sonnet 122, which I covered in depth in part 1 of this series. Note also that 122 can get us to the initial signature of EO, 1 plus 2 plus 2 equals 5 equals E, and 12 plus 2 equals 14 equals O. There's other numbers that work, but as shown in part 1, the number 122 is a demonstrably key number in the first folio, and Sonnet 122 is critical for understanding the tables Oxford has constructed in the sonnets. Continuing on, here we have the 3 sonnets that each contain 7 lines beginning with the letter T. Beyond the Christian numerology, these 3 sonnets total 154 using standard addition, which is obviously the total number of the sonnets. 15 plus 2 equals 15 plus 4, equals 19, the geometric value of T, literally the crux of this table. Also note that the left-hand column numbers 2, 3, and 9 total 14, and the right-hand column numbers 6, 4, and 4 also total 14 for a double score of EOs. This is extremely clever, I think, and I hope you agree. There are no sonnets containing 8 lines beginning with the letter T. There's Christian significance to the number 8, so perhaps Oxford is connecting 8 with the number 0, which can also be read as the letter O. Another possibility is shown here in this slide, a connection to the infinite and the Ouroboros. Again, these are just speculations. And here we have our climactic T-line slide, showing the one sonnet containing 9 lines beginning with T. Note the combination of the numbers 1 and 9 leads us once again back to the geometric value of T, 19. Can we expect anything but virtuosity from our poet in this finale? I think not. Sonnet 77 is the midway point of the sonnets. 77 plus 77 equals 154. 7 plus 7 equals 14, another EO signature. And the standard addition total of 77 plus the sequential addition total of 14 equals 91, which when reversed gives us another 19. And then 7 minus 7 equals 0, or O for Oxford. So Oxford has brought us elaborately and exquisitely to Sonnet 77. I'll offer up here my explanation as to why this sonnet is so important to the Shakespeare canon and the authorship question. Orthodox readings of this sonnet, for the most part, incline to the addressee being the fair youth, with the author instructing the youth, rather simplistically, to write down his thoughts on vacant leaves and waste blanks. Okay, good, not a bad subject. But the first item to note is that in the original quarto, the phrase is waste blacks, not waste blanks. Waste blanks makes the Orthodox reading much easier, but it's not what the author actually wrote. Some editions of the sonnets will note the editorial change, while others, lacking notes, will just silently change it. I won't use the word correct because waste blacks has internal logic to the poem and contains multiple allusions lost when changed to waste blanks. Vacant leaves is a sister phrase to waste blacks, and I suppose the reason why editors choose to change blacks to blanks makes their interpretation seem more logical. But there's another way to interpret vacant leaves. Rather than read vacant as blank or empty, it can be read as having no owner or possessor, as the OED documents with an example circa 1560. So we can read the phrase as leaves containing print which have no owner or possessor, an apt description of unattributed or synonymous texts. Waste is another word with a myriad of meanings. Rather than limit ourselves to the singular meaning of blank sheets found at the beginning or end of a book, or limit the reference to unusable sheets of print due to smudging or an overrun of ink, waste blacks can also be printed text blacks, that is, to quote the OED, that are profitless, serving no purpose, idle, or vain, unless the reader commits to reading, quote unquote, this book, i.e., the poems and plays that we know as the works of Shakespeare. In short, I'm arguing that the addressee in this interpretation is Elizabeth. Oxford is telling her she's grown old, as she can see in her mirror and by observing the sundial reflect time's relentless march forward. If she reads these works, which Oxford has chosen to, or been forced to, abandon, she will rediscover her own words, children nursed, delivered from thy brain, that he has preserved in print. Reacquainting herself with the truths of her life, moments of wisdom and folly, will then enrich the book of her life, thy book, not this book, as she prepares to greet eternity. As I noted in a prior slide, 77 is the midway point of the sonnets, just as the monarch Elizabeth reigns at the halfway point between Oxford and God. Also, it's not an accident that the two sonnets before and the two sonnets after 77 have the initials W and S as their first letters. Sonnet 76 has the double V, W, while Sonnet 79 has an italicized W, which I believe is intentional. As I've stated previously, Oxford used the gematria value of 40 for W, the double V, based on the Latin gematria, and then he'll do something different with the italicized W. The gematria value of S is 18, so the 40 of double V plus S translates to a 58 on either side of Sonnet 77. Add the gematria value of T, which is 19, to 58, and the result is 77. So clearly intentional. And with the italicized W of Sonnet 79, using the Elizabethan version of gematria, the value of W is 21. So 21 for this Elizabethan gematria W plus 18, the gematria value of the S that begins Sonnet 78, results in 39, two of those ever-present Christian numbers. Add the gematria value of 19 from the T that begins Sonnet 77, and the result is 58. So Oxford is surely leading us on a merry chase through the sonnets. So let's see what Sonnet 58 might reveal. Here's Sonnet 58, which I suggest is the crux of the relationship between Elizabeth and Oxford. It must have galled him in his later years to recognize that the main part he played in his mortal life was nothing more than to entertain the Queen. He was consumed by numerous scandals, squeezed financially by the crown via the wardship scheme, suffered through a disastrous first marriage, mismanaged the funds and property he did control, knew he was creating great works of art he couldn't acknowledge, and probably the worst for him, he never gained the battlefield glory his relatives and ancestors had. Yet in Sonnet 58, he doesn't fault Elizabeth, but humbly submits to what God has ordained for him. His last remaining hope was eternal glory by virtue of his literary works. So, Oxford's made Sonnet 77 the centerpiece, using its position within the collected poems, and also by singling out as the only sonnet containing 9 lines beginning with the letter T. Sonnet 77 is more than somewhat morose. The addressee Elizabeth is wrinkled, aging, preparing for eternity. There's a gaping grave waiting for her. Oxford advises her to reflect on the past by rereading his works, wherein he has preserved her words and actions as a way to face the truths of her life, thy book, as he wrote it. Then, by surrounding Sonnet 77 with gematria guideposts, Oxford sends us to Sonnet 58, where, in a more matter-of-fact, less depressing approach, he describes his role as the Queen's entertainer, but doesn't fault her for the truth of his own life. As I've been demonstrating, the sonnets are a maze. They're awash with numeric and thematic connections. The next logical step, then, is to add 77 and 58, which leads us to Sonnet 135, where Oxford continues the tale, but in a far lighter vein, with the tour de force punning on the word will. I'll propose here that with these three sonnets, 77, 58, and 135, Oxford has led us from the tragic, an aging, wrinkled queen reflecting back, to the historic, the part he played with backward-looking equanimity, to the comic, will in overplus, ever entertaining her and still vexing her. So to wrap up, let's go back to Sonnet 77 for a few additional observations. First, there are 58 T's in Sonnet 77 to reinforce the connection to Sonnet 58. Next, the word will appears 4 times, which I don't believe needs elaboration here. And finally, the first letters of the 5 lines that don't begin with T form a perfect anagram, scola, S-C-O-L-A, meaning school in Latin, and a near perfect anagram, C-A-L-O-S, which would be K-A-L-O-S in Greek, meaning beautiful, good, or noble. That the sonnets are encouraging the reader to exercise his or her wit, and that beauty is an overriding theme in them, I would humbly submit are statements of truth. I don't believe these anagrams are accidental. So thank you sincerely for watching these videos, and I hope you'll join me soon for part 3 of this series, where I'll present, yes, even more tables and more Oxfordian interpretation of Shakespeare's sonnets. I'll continue to demonstrate convincingly, I hope, that the numerology, the layout, and even the topography of the original quarto are intrinsic to understanding this incomparable, enticing work of genius. And since we're looking at sonnets 135, 136, and 137, I'll just point out that 13 plus 5 equals 18, 13 plus 6 equals 19, and 13 plus 7 equals 20. So 18 plus 19 plus 20 equals 57, that magic Oxfordian number. And remember, when reading Shakespeare, as sonnets 135, 136, and 137 remind us, always exercise your wit. Thank you again for watching.